"Ma'am, this isn't your place," the officer growled, his voice laced with irritation as he leaned over the counter in the dimly lit police precinct. The faint hum of the coffee machine in the background barely covered the disdain dripping from his tone. The woman, standing tall, her shoulders squared with quiet dignity, didn't flinch. "I'm here for an appointment," she replied evenly, her voice calm but firm. She extended her hand to show her identification, but he didn't even glance at it. His sneer deepened. "Appointment?" he scoffed, taking a step closer. The smell of burnt coffee wafted through the room as he poured himself a fresh cup. "The cleaning staff come in the evenings, not now. Go find a mop if you're that eager to help." The humiliation was sharp, stinging. She felt the stares of the few officers lingering nearby, their chuckles barely suppressed. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't move. "I'm not here to clean," she said, her voice cutting through the air like steel. "I'm here to—" Before she could finish, he cut her off, his temper flaring. "You don't speak unless you're spoken to." His words echoed, drawing the attention of others. He raised the cup of coffee in his hand as if it were a weapon. "You're wasting everyone's time standing here." The woman froze for a split second as the scalding liquid splashed against her face. The pain was immediate, a searing heat that burned her skin and sent her reeling. But even as the world seemed to spin, she refused to let herself stumble. Laughter erupted behind her. "That's what happens when you don't know your place," the officer said, chuckling as he set the now empty cup on the counter. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. It was anger, molten and fierce, bubbling beneath the surface. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tissue, dabbing at her face. Her gaze locked onto his, unwavering, with an intensity that silenced the room. "What are you looking at?" he spat, his smirk faltering under the weight of her glare. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back, her silence louder than any words could have been. There was no outburst, no argument. Just the promise of something that lingered in the air, a quiet storm brewing on the horizon. The precinct buzzed with quiet murmurs as she turned and walked out the door. No one stopped her. No one apologized. The officer simply shrugged, his confidence unshaken as he returned to his desk, oblivious to the chain of events he had just set into motion. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she wasn't just another civilian looking for help. She wasn't there by chance. And this wasn't over. Who was she? Why was she there? And what would happen to the officer who thought his actions would never have consequences? This wasn't just an act of humiliation. It was the beginning of something far bigger, something that would unravel secrets, expose corruption, and leave the precinct, and the officer, reeling in ways they could never have imagined. What will happen when the truth finally comes out? Stay with us until the end to discover a story of resilience, justice, and a twist you'll never see coming. At Plough of Twist, we stand firmly against any form of racism, prejudice, or discrimination. To our Black viewers and all those impacted by systemic injustice, we support you and are committed to telling stories that inspire change and challenge bias. Racism has no place in our world, and through these narratives, we aim to shine a light on resilience, justice, and redemption. Enjoy the story you're about to experience, and if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Together, let's keep the conversation going. Now, let's dive into today's powerful story. The precinct hummed with the monotony of routine. Phones rang incessantly, echoing off the beige walls, their paint peeling in corners neglected for years. Officers moved briskly, the click of boots against tile blending with the murmur of conversations, reports being filed, and the occasional burst of laughter. It was a space alive with its own rhythm, yet under the surface, a tension lingered, one that came with the kind of power unchecked for too long. In the center of it all stood Officer Frank Donovan, a man whose presence demanded attention. Frank was tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp jawline that seemed perpetually clenched. His uniform was always immaculate, his badge polished to a gleam. To his colleagues, he was dependable, a model of authority. But to anyone who dared cross the invisible line he drew, Frank was ruthless. Years of unchecked power had hardened him, and his smirk carried an air of untouchable arrogance. Frank came from a lineage of law enforcement. His father had been a decorated officer, his grandfather before that a sheriff in a small southern town. Law and order were in his blood, or at least that was the story he liked to tell. But behind the accolades and the respect of his peers was a man who wielded his power not as a shield for the vulnerable but as a weapon against those he deemed lesser. To him, respect was something he commanded, not earned. That morning, Frank had walked into the precinct in his usual manner, exchanging curt nods and brief grins with his fellow officers. He carried a coffee cup from his favorite cafe, the logo a bright splash against the dull tones of the station. As he made his way to his desk, a young rookie, Kevin Ramirez, approached him hesitantly. "Morning, Officer Donovan," Kevin said, his voice unsure but respectful. "Captain wanted me to remind you about the training session scheduled for this afternoon." Frank barely glanced at him, taking a slow sip of his coffee before responding. "Training's for those who need it, Ramirez. Tell the captain I'll be busy with something more important." He brushed past the rookie, his words a dismissal. Meanwhile, across town, Maya Thompson sat in her car, her fingers drumming softly against the steering wheel. Maya was everything Frank wasn't, empathetic, driven by purpose, and unwilling to let injustice slide. Her life had been shaped by a deep understanding of struggle, born from her own experiences growing up in a working-class neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, and the odds often felt stacked against her. Maya's parents had always emphasized resilience. Her mother, a nurse, worked long hours at the local hospital, while her father juggled 2 jobs to make ends meet. They had instilled in her a sense of pride and determination, teaching her that her worth wasn't dictated by the assumptions others made about her. Those lessons had carried her far, from excelling academically to eventually joining the FBI, a role she had dreamed of since she was a teenager. Despite her success, Maya remained grounded. She had seen firsthand the disparities in the justice system and had made it her mission to challenge them. Her position as an agent wasn't just a job, it was a platform, a way to create change from within. But with that platform came challenges, particularly as a black woman in a predominantly white, male-dominated field. She had faced her share of microaggressions, outright dismissals, and moments of blatant disrespect. And yet, she never let it deter her. Every slight, every roadblock only strengthened her resolve. This morning, Maya had been assigned to a sensitive case requiring her to work closely with local law enforcement, a task she didn't relish but approached with professionalism. She knew the challenges of navigating these partnerships. The skepticism, the undercurrents of bias, the constant need to prove herself, it was all part of the unspoken job description. As she pulled into the precinct parking lot, Maya took a deep breath, preparing herself for the day ahead. Her tailored blazer and neatly styled hair were a testament to her meticulousness, a silent statement that she belonged in every space she entered, no matter who might doubt it. Inside the station, the environment shifted subtly as Maya walked in. Her presence was commanding, her stride purposeful. Yet, she couldn't ignore the stares, the way conversations seemed to pause momentarily as she passed. It wasn't her first time experiencing it, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. She approached the front desk, where a young officer was seated, his eyes darting nervously between her and his computer screen. "I'm here for a meeting," she said, her voice calm but firm. Before he could respond, Frank Donovan appeared, his towering frame casting a shadow over the desk. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone anything but welcoming. His eyes swept over her, the judgment in his gaze unmistakable. "I have an appointment," Maya replied, meeting his gaze steadily. She began to reach for her identification, but Frank cut her off with a derisive laugh. "Appointment?" he repeated, the corner of his mouth twitching into a smirk. "You don't look like anyone who belongs in this precinct. What, you lose your way on the way to court?" His words were laced with condescension, loud enough to draw the attention of nearby officers. Maya didn't flinch. She held his gaze, her expression unwavering. "I'm here on official business," she said, her voice unwavering. Frank's smirk deepened, his confidence bolstered by the snickers of his colleagues. He picked up his coffee cup, gesturing toward her dismissively. "Official business, huh? Let me guess, someone sent you to file a complaint or ask for help. Newsflash, this isn't the community center." The tension in the room was palpable, every eye on the exchange. Maya opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Frank raised the cup in a deliberate motion. The scalding coffee splashed onto her face, the sudden pain sharp and searing. Gasps rippled through the room. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Maya stood still, her hand instinctively reaching for a tissue to wipe her face. Her movements were controlled, deliberate, despite the sting of the burn. Frank leaned against the counter, his smirk now a full-blown grin. "Lesson number 1, know your place," he said, his voice carrying a note of triumph. Maya didn't respond. She straightened, her gaze never wavering as she locked eyes with him. The room fell silent, the weight of her stare enough to unsettle even the most confident among them. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the exit, her every step measured and deliberate. As the door closed behind her, the silence lingered. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, the air heavy with the unspoken sense that something had shifted. Frank, however, remained unfazed, brushing off the moment as just another display of his authority. But what none of them knew, what Frank couldn't begin to fathom, was that the woman he had humiliated wasn't just anyone. And this wasn't just another day at the precinct. The air outside the precinct was crisp, but Maya barely noticed as she strode to her car. Her mind raced, replaying every detail of the encounter with Frank Donovan. Her face still burned from the coffee, but the sting of humiliation was far worse. She pulled a small compact mirror from her bag, inspecting the reddened skin around her cheek and jawline. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of anger through her, but she forced herself to breathe, to focus. Maya had faced prejudice before, but something about this moment felt different, sharper, heavier. It wasn't just the insult, it was the casualness of it, the way the room had silently condoned it. She had entered that precinct prepared to work alongside these officers, to bridge gaps and handle a case that required cooperation. Instead, she had been reduced to an object of scorn, dismissed before she could even state her purpose. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to reality. She glanced at the screen, her supervisor, Special Agent Michael Hayes. "Agent Thompson," Hayes's voice came through, steady and professional, but with an undertone of concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Maya replied, her voice tight. "Why do you ask?" "There was a call," Hayes said carefully. "Someone from the precinct mentioned an incident." Maya's fingers tightened around the phone. So, the news had traveled faster than she'd expected. She hesitated, considering how much to share. "There was a situation," she admitted. "I'll write up a report." Hayes was silent for a moment, then his tone shifted to something firmer. "Do you want me to pull you from the assignment?" "No," Maya said immediately, her resolve hardening. "I'm staying." "Understood," Hayes replied, though there was a note of hesitation. "Just remember, you don't have to tolerate." "I know," Maya interrupted gently. "I've got this." Ending the call, she leaned back in her seat, staring out at the street. The precinct loomed in her peripheral vision, a symbol of everything she'd spent her career fighting against. She didn't want to be anywhere near it, but leaving wasn't an option. Not now. Not after what had happened. Inside the precinct, Frank was in the break room, regaling his colleagues with an exaggerated version of the morning's events. "You should have seen her face," he said, leaning back in his chair. "She thought she could waltz in here like she owned the place. Maybe next time she'll think twice." One of the officers, a younger man named Daniel Harper, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Donovan, are you sure that was necessary?" he asked cautiously. Frank raised an eyebrow. "Are you questioning me, Harper?" "No, it's just," Harper hesitated, glancing around at the others. "She didn't seem like she was here to cause trouble." Frank's smirk returned. "Doesn't matter why she was here. She needed to be put in her place. You'll learn that soon enough." The room fell silent, the weight of Frank's authority silencing any further dissent. But Harper couldn't shake the unease in his gut. Something about the whole interaction didn't sit right with him. Meanwhile, Maya had driven to a nearby cafe, needing a moment to gather her thoughts. She ordered a tea, pressing the warm cup to her still tender cheek. Her mind shifted to the reason she'd been at the precinct in the first place. The case she was working on involved a network of drug traffickers operating within the city, and recent intel suggested a disturbing possibility: someone inside the precinct might be complicit. Maya had seen corruption before, but the evidence here was thin, just whispers and circumstantial leads. Still, her instincts told her there was something more, and she had come to the precinct hoping to establish a working relationship with the local team. Now, that possibility seemed remote. If Frank Donovan's behavior was any indication, cooperation would be an uphill battle. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Hayes. It was a file containing the names of officers flagged for irregular behavior. At the top of the list, Frank Donovan. Maya stared at the screen, her tea forgotten. The pieces began to click into place. His arrogance, his dismissal of protocol, his overconfidence, they weren't just personality flaws. They were potential red flags. If Donovan was involved, his hostility toward her wasn't just personal. It might have been strategic. The thought steeled her resolve. She wouldn't let him, or anyone else, derail this case. The next morning, Maya returned to the precinct, her demeanor as composed as ever. The burn on her face was hidden beneath expertly applied makeup, but the fire in her eyes was impossible to conceal. She entered the building with purpose, her FBI badge displayed prominently on her lapel. The reaction was immediate. Conversations hushed, heads turned, and the atmosphere shifted. Frank was at his desk, reviewing a stack of reports, when he saw her. His smirk faltered for the briefest moment before returning. "Well, look who's back," he drawled, leaning back in his chair. "What, didn't get enough the first time?" Maya ignored him, walking straight to the captain's office. The door closed behind her, leaving the room buzzing with speculation. Frank leaned toward Harper, his voice low. "She's bluffing. She doesn't have the guts to take this anywhere." But Harper wasn't so sure. He had noticed the way Maya carried herself, the quiet confidence that suggested she was far more than Frank gave her credit for. In the captain's office, Maya laid out her case. She presented her findings with precision, detailing the discrepancies in certain officers' records and the patterns that pointed to possible collusion with the traffickers. The captain listened intently, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern. "I'll authorize an internal review," he said finally. "But you need to tread carefully, Agent Thompson. If you're right, this could blow up in ways we can't control." "I understand," Maya replied. "But if we don't act now, it'll only get worse." As she left the office, Maya felt the weight of what lay ahead. The investigation would be messy, and resistance was inevitable. But she was ready. She had faced worse. Back in the bullpen, Frank watched her with narrowed eyes. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was more than she seemed. And for the first time, a sliver of doubt crept into his mind. Maya, however, didn't spare him a second glance. She had bigger things to focus on. But as she gathered her materials and prepared to leave, she couldn't ignore the sense that the storm was just beginning to brew. What she didn't yet know was just how far-reaching its impact would be, or how much the man who had humiliated her would have to lose. The precinct was unusually quiet that morning, a silence heavy with tension. Officers went about their routines, but the usual camaraderie was absent. Frank Donovan sat at his desk, flipping through a case file, his movements slower than usual. Something felt off, though he couldn't quite place it. Across the room, Harper exchanged a glance with another young officer. The unease was palpable, but no one dared voice it. Maya's presence over the past 2 days had disrupted the fragile status quo in ways they hadn't anticipated. The door to the precinct swung open, and Maya entered, her movements measured but purposeful. She was dressed sharply, her badge gleaming on her belt. Her gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Frank before moving to the captain's office. The subtle shift in the room's energy didn't escape her, it was the kind of tension she had grown accustomed to navigating. Frank leaned back in his chair, watching her. "Back again," he muttered, loud enough for Harper to hear. "She's persistent, I'll give her that." Harper didn't respond, his attention focused on his computer screen. He had spent the night poring over the precinct's case records, and what he found had left him deeply unsettled. Patterns emerged, cases abruptly dropped, evidence missing, witnesses recanting testimonies. It wasn't definitive, but it was enough to confirm his growing suspicion: something wasn't right. Maya reached the captain's office, knocking twice before entering. Inside, Captain Edwards was waiting, his expression unreadable. On the desk in front of him was a stack of files, the culmination of Maya's investigation over the past 2 days. "You're sure about this?" Edwards asked, his tone low. Maya nodded. "The evidence is there. We can't ignore it." Edwards exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "If this goes south, you know how it'll reflect on all of us." "That's a risk I'm willing to take," Maya replied, her voice steady. Edwards studied her for a moment before nodding. "All right. Let's do it." Maya left the office, her heart pounding but her exterior calm. The weight of what was about to happen pressed against her, but she pushed it aside. She had come too far to falter now. As she walked back into the bullpen, the captain's voice cut through the air. "Donovan, my office. Now." Frank glanced up, his smirk faltering slightly. The tone in Edwards's voice wasn't one he was used to hearing. "What's this about?" he asked, rising from his chair. "You'll find out soon enough," Edwards replied curtly. Frank followed him, his steps deliberate. Maya remained in the bullpen, taking a seat at an empty desk. She opened her laptop, her fingers poised over the keyboard, but her attention was fixed on the office door. Inside, Edwards gestured for Frank to sit. "We've got a problem," he began, his tone serious. Frank crossed his arms. "What kind of problem?" Edwards didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened one of the files on his desk and slid it across to Frank. "Explain this." Frank frowned, picking up the file. As he scanned the contents, his expression darkened. "This is nonsense," he said, tossing the file back onto the desk. "You're seriously buying into this?" "The evidence is solid," Edwards said. "You've been under review for months. Agent Thompson's findings only confirmed what we were already suspecting." Frank's jaw tightened. "So, what? You're taking her word over mine?" Edwards leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "This isn't about taking sides, Donovan. It's about accountability. The trail leads back to you." Frank's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay composed. "This is a setup," he said. "I've been doing this job for 20 years. You think I'd throw that away?" "Maybe not intentionally," Edwards replied. "But the evidence speaks for itself." Outside the office, the bullpen was eerily quiet. Harper exchanged another glance with his colleague, their unease growing. The door to the office opened, and Frank stepped out, his expression hard. He didn't look at anyone as he returned to his desk, gathering his things. Maya watched him, her face unreadable. As he passed her, Frank paused, his eyes meeting hers. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low. Maya didn't flinch. You're right, she replied. It's just beginning. Frank left the precinct, the door closing behind him with a resounding thud. The room remained silent, the weight of what had just transpired hanging heavy in the air. Maya exhaled quietly, her resolve unshaken. She knew the fight wasn't over, but she also knew she had taken the first step toward dismantling a system that had allowed people like Frank to thrive unchecked. The ripple effects of her actions would soon become evident, and the storm she had been bracing for was about to hit with full force. The day after Frank Donovan's abrupt departure from the precinct, the tension among the officers lingered like an unspoken weight. Conversations were subdued, and every glance carried a question no one dared to voice aloud. Maya Thompson, however, remained composed. She knew that moments like this required calm precision, not celebration or complacency. Maya sat at the conference table in the captain's office, reviewing the latest evidence with Harper and Captain Edwards. The room was filled with the hum of the air conditioning, the only sound breaking the heavy silence. I want to be clear, Maya began, her tone firm but steady. This investigation isn't just about Donovan. He's part of a larger issue, and if we stop here, we're letting the system protect itself. Edwards nodded, his expression somber. We've already sent Donovan's file to Internal Affairs, but you're saying this runs deeper. It does, Maya replied, pushing a document across the table. These are the cases he worked on over the past 5 years. Look at the pattern: missing evidence, witnesses withdrawing statements, charges dropped without explanation. Donovan wasn't acting alone. Harper leaned forward, studying the file. His face paled as he scanned the pages. You think other officers are involved? I don't think, Maya said, her voice sharp. I know. The records don't lie. Edwards exhaled heavily, running a hand over his face. If this gets out, it needs to get out, Maya interrupted. That's the only way this stops. The captain fell silent, clearly weighing the gravity of her words. Finally, he nodded. What's the next step? Maya straightened in her chair. We need to bring in Donovan for questioning. If we can get him to talk, he might lead us to the others. Edwards frowned. Do you really think he'll cooperate? Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. He won't have a choice. Frank Donovan sat in his small, cluttered home, a bottle of whiskey on the table in front of him. The blinds were drawn, casting long shadows across the room. His mind raced, replaying the events of the past 24 hours. The humiliation, the accusations, the realization that everything he had built was crumbling. His phone buzzed on the table. He ignored it, taking another swig from the bottle. But the buzzing persisted, insistent and grating. With a growl, he grabbed the phone and answered. What? He barked. You think sitting there feeling sorry for yourself is going to fix this? The voice on the other end was low and urgent. Frank's grip on the phone tightened. Who the hell is this? You know who it is, the voice replied. We warned you this could happen. You got sloppy. I didn't do anything wrong, Frank snapped. This is all a setup. It doesn't matter what you think, the voice said coldly. What matters is what they can prove. And right now, they've got enough to bury you, and us. Frank leaned back, his jaw clenching. What do you want me to do? Fix it, the voice replied. Do whatever it takes. But don't think for a second that you're untouchable anymore. The line went dead, leaving Frank alone with the silence and his spiraling thoughts. The next morning, Frank arrived at the precinct unannounced. The room fell silent as he walked in, his presence a stark contrast to the unease that filled the air. He ignored the stairs, heading straight for the captain's office. Edwards looked up as Frank entered, his expression a mix of surprise and caution. Donovan. What are you doing here? I'm here to set the record straight, Frank said, his tone even but tinged with defiance. Maya, who was seated across from Edwards, didn't react outwardly, but her mind raced. This wasn't part of the plan, and Frank's sudden reappearance was both a risk and an opportunity. "You want to talk?" Edward said, gesturing to the chair. "Fine. Sit." Frank remained standing. "I'm not here to play games. I know what you're trying to do, and I'm not going down without a fight." Maya finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "No one's trying to play games, Donovan. We're looking for the truth." Frank's eyes narrowed as he turned to her. "The truth? Don't make me laugh. You don't care about the truth. You're just here to take me down." "This isn't about you," Maya replied, her gaze steady. "This is about the people you've hurt, the cases you've compromised. If you want to clear your name, now's your chance." Frank let out a bitter laugh. "Clear my name? You've already decided I'm guilty." "We've followed the evidence," Maya said. "But if there's more to the story, this is your chance to tell it." The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Frank sat down, his movements heavy. He looked at Maya, his expression hard but tinged with something else, fear, perhaps, or desperation. "You think you've got it all figured out," he said quietly. "But you have no idea what you're dealing with." "Then tell me," Maya said, leaning forward. "Help me understand." Frank hesitated, his jaw working as he struggled with the decision. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. "There's more than just me," he said. "And if you think this ends with me, you're wrong. You're playing with fire, and you don't even realize it." Maya's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. "Who else is involved?" Frank shook his head. "If I tell you, I'm a dead man." "Not if we protect you," Maya said. "But you have to trust me." Frank laughed bitterly. "Trust you? After everything?" "You don't have a choice," Maya replied. "You can either cooperate, or you can take the fall alone." Frank stared at her, his jaw tight. Finally, he nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine. I'll talk. But if this backfires, it's on you." Maya nodded, her mind already racing with the implications of his words. This was the break she had been waiting for, but it was only the beginning. The truth Frank was about to reveal would send shockwaves through the precinct, and far beyond. Frank Donovan sat in the interrogation room, his broad shoulders hunched as though the weight of the world rested squarely on them. The small room was stark, illuminated by a single fluorescent light that cast harsh shadows across his face. Across from him, Maya Thompson sat calmly, a notepad in front of her. To her left was Captain Edwards, who looked far less composed, his lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, Frank looked diminished. The arrogance, the untouchable bravado he had worn so confidently, had cracked under the mounting pressure. He drummed his fingers against the table, his eyes darting to the mirror behind Maya, fully aware of the others likely watching from the observation room. "You wanted the truth," Frank began, his voice low but steady. "Fine. Here it is." Maya didn't respond immediately. She let the silence linger, a tactic that made even the most confident suspects squirm. Finally, she leaned forward slightly. "We're listening." Frank exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. "You think I'm the problem? That if you take me down, everything will magically get better. But the truth is, I'm just a piece of it. The system's been broken for a long time." "Be specific," Maya said, her tone measured but firm. "Names. Dates. Actions." Frank's lip curled in a bitter half-smile. "You really think it's that simple, don't you? There are layers to this. People above me. People you don't even know exist." "Then help us know," Captain Edwards interjected, his frustration evident. "Give us something we can act on." Frank leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You're not ready for what you'll find." Maya's gaze didn't waver. "Try us." For a moment, Frank hesitated, his eyes locked on Maya's. He seemed to be weighing his options, calculating the risks. Finally, he spoke. There's a group. Officers, judges, even a couple of politicians. They protect each other, cover for each other. If someone steps out of line, they're silenced. Silenced how? Maya asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Frank's expression darkened. Whatever it takes. Threats, blackmail, sometimes worse. I've seen it happen. Edwards leaned forward. And you? What's your role in all of this? Frank's jaw clenched. I enforce their rules. Make sure the wrong people don't ask the wrong questions. Keep things running smoothly. Which cases? Maya pressed. How many lives have been affected because of this? Frank looked away, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Too many. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them like a suffocating blanket. Maya exchanged a glance with Edwards, who looked visibly shaken. This is bigger than I expected, Edwards admitted, his voice low. It always is, Maya replied, her focus still on Frank. We need evidence. Something concrete to prove what you're saying. Frank nodded slowly. There's a storage unit. Under my name, but it's not mine. It's where they keep records, things they don't want on the books. If you find it, you'll find everything you need. Where is it? Maya asked. Frank hesitated again, then rattled off an address. Maya jotted it down quickly, her mind already racing with the implications. An hour later, Maya and Harper stood outside the storage facility, the address Frank had provided scrawled on a slip of paper in her hand. The place was nondescript, the kind of facility people used to store old furniture or forgotten mementos. But Maya knew better. What lay behind those doors could unravel years of corruption. Are you sure about this? Harper asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. We don't have a choice, Maya replied. If what Donovan said is true, this could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for. Harper nodded, and they approached the unit. Maya entered the access code Frank had provided, and the door slid open with a low rumble. Inside, rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, along with boxes stacked haphazardly on the floor. Maya stepped inside, her flashlight cutting through the dimness. She opened the first cabinet, revealing folders stuffed with documents. Harper joined her, his own flashlight illuminating a box labeled Confidential. As they began sorting through the materials, the scope of the operation became painfully clear. There were case files with evidence that had been lost, payments made to keep witnesses quiet, and correspondence implicating multiple high-ranking officials. This is massive, Harper said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya nodded, her jaw tight. We need to catalog everything. This is our proof. Back at the precinct, Frank sat in the holding cell, his head resting against the wall. The room was silent, save for the occasional shuffle of footsteps from the hallway. He didn't look up when the door opened, but he tensed as Maya entered. You weren't lying, she said, holding up a folder from the storage unit. Frank smirked faintly. Told you. Maya's expression hardened. This doesn't absolve you, Donovan. You're still responsible for your part in this. I know, he said quietly. But if this brings the whole thing down, maybe it's worth it. Maya studied him for a moment, trying to reconcile the man who had humiliated her days earlier with the one now seemingly resigned to his fate. She didn't trust him, couldn't trust him, but she couldn't deny the value of what he had provided. You'll testify, she said. It wasn't a question. Frank nodded. If it means taking them down, I'll do it. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The files from the storage unit were handed over to Internal Affairs, who launched a full-scale investigation. Names began to surface, implicating individuals across multiple departments and levels of government. But with progress came pushback. Maya received an anonymous threat on her phone, nothing overt, just a reminder that she was being watched. Harper found his car vandalized, a warning not to dig too deep. The tension mounted, but so did their determination. Maya met with Hayes in a secure location to discuss the next steps. "We're close," she said. "But this won't end without backlash." "Stay focused," Hayes advised. "We'll protect you, but you have to see this through." Maya nodded, her resolve unshaken. The pieces were falling into place, but the endgame was far from certain. What she didn't yet know was just how far the opposition would go to protect their secrets, and how much she would have to risk to ensure justice prevailed. The precinct was unusually quiet the following morning. The ripple effects of Maya's findings were starting to reach every corner of the department. Officers avoided eye contact, whispers filled the air, and the tension was nearly tangible. Maya walked through the bullpen with measured strides, aware of the stares that followed her but unfazed by them. Her focus remained fixed on the task at hand. Harper met her near the conference room, holding a stack of files from the storage unit. His face was pale, his usual calm demeanor replaced with unease. "They're starting to connect the dots," Harper said in a low voice. "Internal Affairs has already flagged half a dozen officers. Names are coming out." Maya nodded. "Good. That's what we need." "But it's stirring up trouble," Harper added. "I overheard some of them talking. They're nervous, angry. They think you're trying to dismantle the precinct." Maya's expression hardened. "I'm trying to fix it." Harper exhaled, his gaze dropping to the files in his hands. "Just, be careful. People don't like feeling cornered." Maya placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "I know the risks, Harper. But we're doing the right thing. That's all that matters." Inside the conference room, Captain Edwards was seated with two agents from Internal Affairs, their faces grim as they reviewed the latest reports. The tension in the room was thick as Maya and Harper entered. Edwards gestured for them to sit. "We're at a tipping point," one of the IA agents said without preamble. "The evidence is damning, but it's also volatile. If we push too hard, too fast, this whole operation could implode." "We don't have the luxury of time," Maya countered. "The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks." The second agent leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "And if we move too quickly, we risk losing key players. These people are deeply embedded, Agent Thompson. They've survived this long because they know how to operate in the shadows." Maya's jaw tightened. She understood the risks, but the thought of letting anyone slip through the cracks was unbearable. "We have Frank Donovan's testimony," she said. "He's ready to cooperate. That gives us leverage." "Leverage," the first agent echoed, his tone skeptical. "Or a target on our backs." The room fell silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on everyone present. Finally, Captain Edwards spoke, his voice steady but weary. "What's the plan?" Maya glanced at Harper, then back at the IA agents. "We proceed carefully, but decisively. We can't let fear dictate our actions. If we do, they win." Later that afternoon, Frank was brought back to the precinct under heavy guard. He sat in the interrogation room, his usual bravado replaced with a quiet resignation. Maya entered with a recorder and a thick folder of evidence, setting it down on the table in front of him. "You ready?" she asked, her voice devoid of any trace of the hostility that had once defined their interactions. Frank nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Maya pressed record, her gaze steady as she addressed him. "State your name and occupation for the record." "Franklin Donovan," he said, his voice rough. "Former officer of the 12th Precinct. Do you understand that by providing testimony, you're implicating yourself in criminal activity?" Maya asked. "I do," Frank replied. "And you're prepared to cooperate fully with this investigation?" Frank hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Maya leaned back in her chair, her tone softening slightly. Then start at the beginning. How did this all start? Frank exhaled heavily, running a hand over his face. It wasn't always like this. When I first joined the force, I actually believed in what we were doing. I thought we were making a difference. But somewhere along the way, the lines got blurred. What changed? Maya pressed. Frank's gaze dropped to the table. Money. Power. It's always the same story. Someone higher up offers a deal, a favor in exchange for looking the other way. At first, it's small stuff. Then it gets bigger. Before you know it, you're in too deep to get out. Who brought you in? Maya asked. Frank hesitated again, his jaw tightening. A guy named Monroe. He was a lieutenant back then. He said it was just the way things worked. Play along, or get left behind, he told me. Monroe, Maya repeated, scribbling the name in her notebook. Where is he now? Frank laughed bitterly. Probably sipping cocktails on a beach somewhere. He retired a few years ago, but his fingerprints are all over this. He set up the network. He's the one who taught us how to cover our tracks. And who's running it now? Maya asked. Frank's expression darkened. That's the thing. It's not one person. It's a machine. You take out one cog, and another one takes its place. Maya fell silent, absorbing his words. The scope of what they were dealing with was staggering, but she refused to let it deter her. As night fell, the precinct was quieter than usual. Many of the officers had already gone home, leaving only a skeleton crew on duty. Maya sat at her desk, poring over the latest reports, when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, an unknown number. She answered cautiously. Thompson. The voice on the other end was distorted, masked by a voice changer. You're making a mistake. Maya's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. Who is this? You think you're untouchable, the voice continued. You're not. Walk away while you still can. The line went dead, leaving Maya with a cold knot of dread in her stomach. She glanced around the bullpen, her mind racing. Whoever it was, they were watching her. Harper approached, noticing her tension. Everything okay? Maya hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Just, tired. But the truth was, she wasn't okay. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous the situation became. And the closer they got to the truth, the more enemies they made. By the time Maya returned to her apartment that night, exhaustion was beginning to set in. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind replayed the events of the day, the threats, the testimony, the overwhelming scope of what they were up against. For the first time in a long time, doubt crept in. Was she in over her head? Was she putting herself, and everyone else, in danger by pushing too hard, too fast? But then she thought of the victims, the lives destroyed by the corruption they were uncovering. She thought of the people who had been silenced, the justice that had been denied. And she knew she couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. The fight was far from over. But no matter how dark the path ahead seemed, Maya was determined to see it through to the end. The precinct was buzzing with restrained tension the next morning. The air felt heavier, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on everyone. Officers moved through their routines cautiously, avoiding prolonged eye contact and speaking in hushed tones. Maya walked in with Harper at her side, the both of them keenly aware of the growing unease among the staff. The walls were closing in on the guilty, and they all knew it. Inside the conference room, Captain Edwards and the internal affairs agents were already waiting, the table strewn with files and evidence pulled from the storage unit. Maya placed her bag on the table and sat down, Harper taking the seat beside her. We've received a tip, one of the IA agents began without preamble. Someone claiming to have additional information about the network. They're willing to talk, but only under certain conditions. Maya frowned. What conditions? The agent hesitated. Anonymity and immunity. Harper scoffed. Immunity? We can't just hand that out. We might not have a choice, the second agent interjected. If their information can take this operation down, it's worth considering. Maya leaned back, her arms crossed. Do we have any reason to trust this source? They've provided preliminary evidence, the first agent replied, sliding a document across the table. Enough to verify they've been on the inside. Maya scanned the document, her jaw tightening. The details were damning: transactions, communications, even meeting locations. It was enough to suggest the source was deeply embedded. When's the meeting? She asked. Tonight, the agent replied. They've requested a secure location. By nightfall, Maya, Harper, and the IA team had set up in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The location was chosen for its privacy, a place where their informant could speak freely without fear of being overheard or tracked. The warehouse was dimly lit, the sound of dripping water echoing through the cavernous space. Maya stood by one of the windows, her eyes scanning the street outside. You think they'll show? Harper asked, his tone low. They will, Maya replied. If they're serious about exposing this, they don't have a choice. The sound of tires on gravel drew their attention. A black sedan pulled up to the entrance, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Maya and Harper exchanged a glance before heading toward the car, the IA agents following close behind. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. I'm unarmed, he called out, his voice steady but cautious. Keep it that way, Harper muttered under his breath. The man approached slowly, his movements deliberate. As he stepped into the light, Maya recognized him immediately. It was one of the officers from the precinct, Daniel Harper's colleague, Officer Kevin Ramirez. Ramirez? Harper said, his voice laced with disbelief. Ramirez nodded, his face grim. I told you it ran deep, he said quietly. I wasn't lying. Maya stepped forward, her expression unreadable. Why now? Why come forward after all this time? Ramirez hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. Because I can't keep living with it, he admitted. I joined the force to help people, not this. And what exactly is the this? Maya pressed. Ramirez looked up, his eyes filled with guilt. A network of corruption so big it's hard to believe. It started with small favors, overlooking certain infractions, misplacing evidence. But it grew. Money started flowing, and people got greedy. Before long, it wasn't about protecting anyone. It was about power. Who's running it now? Maya asked. Ramirez hesitated, glancing nervously at the IA agents. It's not just one person, he said finally. It's a group. They call the shots, decide who to protect and who to throw under the bus. Names, Maya demanded. We need names. Ramirez nodded, his shoulders slumping. Lieutenant Monroe set it up, but he's not the only one. Captain Edwards is in on it, too. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hitting like a hammer. Harper stared at Ramirez, his expression a mix of shock and anger. You're saying the captain, the man sitting in that conference room with us, is part of this? Yes, Ramirez said. He's been playing both sides, trying to keep the heat off himself. But he's just as guilty as the rest of them. Maya's mind raced, piecing together the implications. Edwards had been one of the few she thought she could trust. If Ramirez was telling the truth, it meant their investigation was compromised from the start. We need proof, she said finally. Something concrete. Ramirez reached into his pocket slowly, pulling out a flash drive. This has everything, he said. Emails, bank transfers, recordings. It's all there. Maya took the drive, her fingers curling tightly around it. Why didn't you bring this to us sooner? Because I was scared, Ramirez admitted. You've seen what they do to people who cross them. Maya nodded, her expression softening slightly. You're doing the right thing now. Back at the precinct, Maya and Harper sat in a secure room, reviewing the contents of the flash drive. The evidence was damning, emails between Edwards and Monroe, financial records showing bribes, even recordings of meetings where decisions were made to manipulate cases. We've got him, Harper said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Maya nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. We need to move carefully. If Edwards catches wind of this, he'll destroy whatever else is out there. Harper frowned. Do you think IA is clean? Can we trust them to handle this? Maya hesitated, the weight of the question settling over her. We don't have a choice. If we sit on this, more people will get hurt. As they prepared to present the evidence, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. The walls were closing in on Edwards and his network, but they wouldn't go down without a fight. She glanced at Harper, her resolve hardening. Let's finish this. The precinct was a whirlwind of controlled chaos as internal affairs moved in. Officers whispered nervously, their faces tight with apprehension. The tension reached its peak when Captain Edwards was escorted out of the building in handcuffs, his expression a mixture of fury and humiliation. For years, he had operated with impunity, weaving himself into a web of corruption so thick it had seemed untouchable. Now, that web was unraveling, and he was at its center. Maya Thompson stood in the corner of the bullpen, watching silently as Edwards was led past her. Their eyes met briefly, his glare filled with contempt. But Maya didn't flinch. She had seen the depths of his betrayal, the lives destroyed by his greed and manipulation. There was no satisfaction in his downfall, only a grim sense of justice. You think this changes anything? Edward sneered as he passed her, his voice low but venomous. You think you've won? Maya held his gaze, her voice calm but resolute. It's not about winning. It's about doing what's right. As he was escorted out, a hush fell over the precinct. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Edwards, but for everyone who had turned a blind eye, who had chosen silence over accountability. Frank Donovan sat in a courtroom weeks later, his testimony pivotal in exposing the depth of the corruption. He spoke with a mix of bitterness and regret, recounting the years he had spent enforcing the will of a broken system. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension as he named names, detailed transactions, and laid bare the inner workings of the network. When it was over, Frank sat back in his chair, his shoulders slumped. He had burned every bridge, sacrificed whatever remained of his career. But for the first time in years, he felt a sliver of relief. After the trial, Maya approached him outside the courthouse. You did the right thing, she said, her tone neutral but sincere. Frank gave a humorless laugh. Doesn't feel like it. It will, Maya replied. Eventually. Frank looked at her, his expression unreadable. You think this changes anything? It's a start, Maya said simply. And sometimes, that's enough. Officer Kevin Ramirez stood in the precinct's now quiet bullpen, watching as new leadership began to take shape. His decision to come forward had been the turning point, and while it had cost him the trust of some of his colleagues, it had also brought a sense of clarity. He had chosen the harder path, but it was one he could walk with his head held high. You did good, Ramirez, Harper said, clapping him on the shoulder. Takes guts to do what you did. Ramirez nodded, his face set with determination. It was the only choice. For Maya, the fallout of the case was both a victory and a reminder of the work that still needed to be done. The network had been dismantled, but the scars it left behind were deep. She had become a symbol of resilience, not just for her colleagues but for the community she had sworn to serve. On her last day at the precinct, Maya packed up her desk, the weight of the past weeks pressing on her shoulders. Harper walked in, a rare smile on his face. "Heading out?" he asked. Maya nodded. "Back to headquarters. There's another case waiting for me." Harper hesitated, then said, "You made a difference here. Don't forget that." Maya smiled faintly. "Thanks, Harper. Take care of this place, will you?" He nodded, and as she walked out of the precinct for the last time, she felt a sense of closure. The battle wasn't over, but for now, she had done her part. The ripple effects of the investigation were felt far and wide. Policies were changed, oversight committees were established, and a new era of accountability began to take shape. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As for Maya, she returned to the FBI, her reputation as a tenacious and principled agent solidified. She carried the lessons of the case with her, a reminder that even the most entrenched systems could be challenged, that justice was worth fighting for. To everyone watching this story unfold, what does it mean to stand up for what's right in the face of overwhelming odds? Maya Thompson's journey reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. Every decision, every action, has the power to shape the world around us. It's not about being perfect, it's about being willing to make a difference, no matter how small. What do you think? Would you have had the strength to do what Maya did? To push forward, even when the odds were against you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, we want to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Tales of Twist for more narratives that challenge, inspire, and keep you on the edge of your seat. Let's keep these conversations going, one story at a time.